Good morning, Breakfast with Bacon fans. It's really funny that just today I was listening to a podcast, and in the podcast they mentioned all the lies that we have been fed, including, and I'm going to have ask my guest about this because I haven't told her I'm going to ask her this yet, including that people who are born of IVF are actually being found to have infertility problems themselves. And I was like, oh, that's a new one. I hadn't heard that one, but it makes sense. So my guest today might know the answer to that, even though she's probably thinking, "Oh, you didn't tell me that." Is Stacy Trasancos. She's the author of a book called "IVF is Not the Way," and I'm going to look down at the tagline because I always forget the false promises of artificial procreation. And for me personally, again, before I say hello to her, anything with the word artificial ought to be concerning to you. Artificial intelligence, artificial sweeteners, artificial procreation. Artificial is something we get from Satan because only God can create. And if it's fake, we might want to be wary of it. So after that long introduction, my guest Stacy Trasancos has written this book. She comes from the perspectives that many of you will appreciate theologically, philosophically, and she's a chemist. So also scientifically, what are the problems with this? So much I want to talk about because this is something I'm very passionate about lately. Stacy, welcome to the Breakfast with Bacon show. Sorry that the intro was so long like that. And I didn't even talk about all the smart stuff about you, like your degrees or your family. But I'm so excited to talk to you and to ask you why you wrote this book.
Oh, thank you so much, Christine. It's great to be here, and I very much appreciate the work you do to build marriages and families. And this definitely dovetails right in there. And what I hope to add to this conversation is a little bit of my background, as a chemist with a scientific approach to these questions, and as a convert, someone who just wanted to know the truth. And this is a difficult topic that's probably about to explode in our nation with the executive order from President Trump. God bless him, but this issue he's not right on. And we need to be ready as believers to engage the public in why IVF is not the way, because most people, even pro-life people who agree that life begins at conception, they think artificial reproduction is just fine. And to answer why it's not just fine, you have to get into what the human person is, what marriage is, what human dignity is. And all of those are enormous arguments to have to make. And they are so countercultural. They're on one hand simple truths that strike chords in our heart, but on the other hand, it's hard to spell it out for someone who just wants the bullet point. So it's a worthy conversation, and I really appreciate you opening it up to your audience to discuss this.
Yeah, and it's very personal for me as well because I have a family member right now who I love and adore, who is currently pregnant with a child that she purchased, to be perfectly honest. And everyone in the family is very, very supportive of this. And of course, now that she's pregnant, she was, afraid to say something to me. And I said, a child is always created by God.
Yeah.
There's no need to be afraid. I'm going to love this child as much as I would love a child that was created the natural way. I just was hoping that they would take my information in advance to say you're creating this child already with a deficit, and for selfish reasons. We don't think we're being selfish, but
Right.
I want another child, or I don't want to have just one child, or I want this or that. And
Mhm.
anyway, so good people make this decision. My own daughters had arguments with me. If my
Mhm.
sister couldn't conceive, I would definitely carry a child for her. And we are looked
Yep.
at as the bad guys. Why should we be concerned? What are some of the biggest reasons why we should be concerned, or
Biggest
why we shouldn't create a child through IVF?
Yeah, the biggest reason, I just want to first what you said in the beginning about they're now learning that these people born from IVF are having more health problems than expected. That's very true. There's a document on the USCCB website that lists the human cost of IVF in terms of what it does to the mother to have to take all these hormones and what it does to the child. And as far as your question of, or what your statement, your information at the beginning about what it does to the children, we're living the experiment right now. I mean, the first IVF babies, the first test tube babies, are just now becoming adults, and maybe some of them early grandparents, and so we really are living the experiment, and we don't know. But what we do know is that these babies are at higher risk for cancer that is not inherited, so it's not genetic, and they're at higher risk for genetic anomalies also that aren't inherited. So something gets messed up at a higher rate by producing them in the lab like this. Um, so that's one reason not to do it, because there's so much we don't know. But the main reason the church, the Catholic Church, says not to do IVF, why it's illicit and immoral, is because it violates the rights of the child. And we need to change the whole conversation, not to be talking about what I want a genetic child, I want to have babies on my own terms. It's about that child. It's about being good parents to that child before the child's ever conceived. And you violate the right of that new human person, that baby, when you don't allow them to be conceived in the loving bond of marriage, in the bond, body and soul, physical and spiritual, in marriage. You can't just say we're spiritually united and then set the biological part off to the lab. It needs to be body and soul united as one. And all of us, a million things can go wrong in the way we're conceived and brought up, but all of us had that same right. We all had a right as a child to be born of the intimate love of a healthy marriage. And so if you have a child that's conceived and born by IVF, the child's rights were violated. Acknowledge that, repent of that, and set it right. I mean, that's all that has to be done. The child is no less dignified. It's actually all about the child's dignity. And set it right. Go about dealing with whatever it was in your marriage and yourself that made you want to do that in the first place, and fix it, and you'll be a better parent for it.
Well, let's start with the perfect situation, right? The best situation, the one you just kind of alluded to. Husband and wife are in a happy marriage. They love each other and they just can't conceive.
Mhm.
They've had natural sex and they can't conceive that way. So what is wrong with taking his sperm and her egg and creating it in a petri dish and then reimplanting it in the mom?
The mom. It's domineering. It's saying to God, I am not open to the gifts that you have in store for me and us in our marriage. We're not open to that. We're not open to life that way. And we're going to take matters into our own hands. And it's a very dominating act to say, to the husband, I don't need you in the act of conceiving. You're going to go into the closet at the hospital with the props they have there and produce the sperm all by yourself.
And
And
sin, since the church
it's
considers
a sin.
masturbation a sin, and
Exactly. Yeah.
yeah.
I didn't want to say that, but yeah, I
And
was
perhaps
alluding.
lust is the sin, and you have to stare at the
Yeah.
magazines of, yeah.
That's how they do it. And then for the woman to, and I've had couples who went through IVF say how weird this was for them in retrospect. The woman injects herself with all these hormones that shut down, basically put her in early menopause, and then restart her cycle so that she produces more eggs than she should produce. So there's a bit of yeah, I'm talking right now. So there's a bit of unnaturalness and even that. And so the woman gives the eggs, but then the baby is conceived in the lab without mother or father even there. They've contributed their biological material, the baby's conceived. And then, even worse than both of those, I think, is when the child is introduced into the mother. It's a doctor between her legs, that is putting the child there. So it it really, nobody wants to talk about those parts very much of the process, but you really are taking the life giving away from the love making and completely separating those two things. And there are repercussions to pay for doing that. It affects your bond. It affects how you approach other problems in your marriage together. You dominate and you don't stay open to the way things are.
It is funny because you are the expert in this, and I'm the expert, thank you, Jesus, whatever God's wisdom has given me on marriage. And there is
Yes, I know.
something that men have to deal with about their brain is wired structurally and hormonally to provide and protect. And when I can't
Yeah,
provide for you this creation of a child, there's something that affects the male psyche, like someone else had to do my job. And we don't want to address those issues as well, you know.
exactly.
And that doesn't even touch on, Stacy, the problems that we've read about again and again and again about the wrong babies implanted in the wrong wombs, and then the legal
There's that.
aspects. I mean, just this week I read more about a child, two boys were switched into different parents' wombs, and then who has the legal
Yeah.
rights to that child? The one who owns the biological material or the one who birthed the child? And, you know, so courts in this particular one that I read said, no, you
Yeah.
have the right to raise the child that you birthed, even though it's the biological material of someone else, someone else's sperm, someone else's egg. And
Yeah,
what does that
and
do
how
to the
are people
child?
even supposed to feel about that?
Right.
It's very, how's the child supposed to feel about that when he grows up and hears about this? Excuse me.
Oh, no, I love that we're
I'm
talking about
gonna
IVF and
I don't
children,
want
and
to
you've got seven
you're
of your
totally
own.
welcome here. You're totally welcome here, but I'm trying to have a conversation. Okay, tell me what you need.
But I need to talk. I need
Okay.
to talk.
Say hi. Okay.
Hi.
Say hi.
Hi, honey. You're on TV. People are watching you on YouTube and all the other places.
Yeah, I was like a princess.
Yeah, you are.
Yes.
You're such a princess.
And this is why we want everyone to give birth to their own princesses.
Tomorrow?
Yes. Okay, go play with your toys. Her toy room is right there. So
And when you're
you enjoy.
done, if you go play with your toys when you're done, mommy will let you see yourself on TV, okay?
Yes. Yeah, Meemaw.
Oh, Mima. That's right.
Yeah. Meemaw. Yeah, I talked to couples when I was doing the book because I'm very left-brained, and so I'm very good, I guess, at
Mathematical
the
and
science and the dogma and the philosophy and laying out the argument. But the publisher said, you need to breathe some life into it too, because it's going to be hard for people to read. So I interviewed couples who had undergone IVF, and that was what almost all of them said to me is that they didn't think about it at the time because they just wanted a baby. They're very goal focused on just getting that baby. And they didn't think about the repercussions to the relationship of doing things this way. But they said later, after the baby's there, and we're talking like 10, 12 years later, it became the untalked about issue in marriage that they had done this, that they had put other embryos in the freezer, and it became a taboo subject in the marriage they didn't want to talk about. And as you know so well, anytime you have a communication breakdown in marriage, when there's something that big that you can't talk about and you just stuff it, resentment builds. And the most heartbreaking thing I heard is one mom said she's got children now who were born, two children who were born by IVF and are about to become teenagers, and she's really worried about what they think a healthy marriage is because she and her husband, she said, haven't demonstrated it because they could never talk about that thing they broke when they conceived these children in the lab. And they had even used another woman's eggs because the mother that raised the children was told by the doctor that her eggs weren't healthy, and if they wanted the baby, just use another mother's eggs. And she didn't even think about it at the time how hard it would be to tell her children they're not biologically even hers. And so she was, the reason she talked to me about it anonymously was because she wanted to warn other women and men, don't get to this point. She said she had no idea 12, 15 years ago what it would break in her marriage. And years of tears, she said, and they still to this day don't know how to get out of that hole. She's just kind of stuck there.
Well, send them to
And
me.
I just find that so sad.
Yeah, send them to me. We'll talk about that afterwards. Have they told the children? Do the children
They
know
had
that they were
when I
created
talked
by
to this
someone else's
woman and
egg?
honestly hadn't, no,
So the children still don't know that they don't
don't know.
biologically belong to their mother.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a hard
and it just hangs
call.
over her. And in my marriage, we've had problems that we had to work through, and I know how hard it is just trying to survive a normal marriage, but having to confront something like that. But that's the hope too. They absolutely can. They absolutely can have the conversation and get past it and do all the right things by their children. That's what I really encourage people in the book. We all sin. What we're supposed to do is set it right. IVF is not the way, but you can get back on track if you've done that. You can recover from it. So hope for families who have already used it, but a warning for the families who haven't yet used it. You might think it solves your problem and gives you the baby you want, but it just creates other problems. And it keeps you from really knowing what God's will for your life was all along.
What about the others? What about the other research you've done, the effects on, we'll get to the children in a moment, but the single parent homes, the homosexual homes where it's
Yeah.
maybe not even biological material. And you know what? You can answer that too with the children. What are the effects we're seeing on the children in these relationships or in these single parent homes of IVF on those households,
Yeah, they
lives?
one story I looked up, the woman it was on a site for people who are conceived by IVF who are speaking out about it. And this one woman was saying that she didn't know, but the doctor who her parents had used for IVF had been for years using his own
Oh, I
sperm.
saw that on TV.
and and she didn't know it, but she not only had sexual relations with but almost married a half brother because she didn't know in that town. And that was traumatizing enough, but she said the real trauma is anytime now she sees anybody that looks like her, she wonders if it's a sibling. She's now, you know, super vigilant about who her children even become friends with because she's just got this trauma, and she looks at every other person out there as potentially a family member. And so not only is she mourning not knowing her half brothers and sisters all these years, um, she's terrified about who she's genetically related to out there that she doesn't even know about. And so, I had to think about that for a while because I don't think we can really understand what that's like if we haven't been in that situation. But the more we have these sperm banks and egg banks and embryo banks, the more it's just going to it's going to get confused. And
Already
just to
is.
cap with a really dismal statement is the closer they get to artificial wombs and growing embryos completely in the lab, even by taking skin cells and reprogramming them to gamete cells and then growing people that way, we could have a day, a time in 20 or 30 years where there's people walking among us who have no prayer of knowing who their genetic parents are and who do know they were conceived for scientific purposes. They were never even conceived in any kind of love. And, whenever you choose IVF, you're choosing to head our society in that direction. And I find that horrifying.
What are some of the, and I know I'll probably go back and forth, but we're talking a lot of societal and emotional issues, traumatic. What about chemical, biological? For instance, when I first opened and said, we are finding out that
Yeah.
children who are conceived in IVF are having fertility issues of their own. What do
Mhm.
we scientifically know so far?
The document from the Secretariat of Pro-Life Activities at the USCCB has a document called In Vitro Fertilization, the Human Cost. And just to list some of those, and these studies are all from 2003 onward, so pretty recent in scientific terms. Infants conceived by IVF are 30 to 40% more at risk for birth defects, and again, not inherited. Children ages 5 and above who were conceived by IVF require surgery more often. Risk of major malformation 1.8 times higher. They have an increased risk of birth defects such as holes in the heart or cleft lip. 10 times more likely to suffer from genetic disorders. have vascular dysfunction that's not due to their genetics. They're 2 to 3 times higher risk for muscle and liver cancer, higher blood pressure, adiposity, higher glucose levels, not related to genetics. Again, they can only ascribe it to the IVF. Congenital anomalies and congenital malformation is about 1/3 higher in children, 1/3 higher in children conceived by IVF. And that's just what we've noticed so far. One woman I talked to gives less she works with fertility care, and so she gives these lessons and classes to nurses, and she said nurses in the NICU, the neonatal and ICU, they told her, we will never use IVF. And I asked her, I'm like, why do they say they'll never use IVF? And she said, because these nurses see what it does to these babies born prematurely, how many of them suffer because they were conceived this way. So much so that the women who see that on a daily basis as nurses will not use the procedure.
What
And
do they
that's
see?
something the public doesn't know.
Yeah, what do they see? Are you just saying that they're more premature, or in comparing apples to apples, an IVF baby of 7 pounds and a naturally
Yeah.
conceived baby of 7 pounds? I'm kind of curious, what are they seeing? Are they seeing other things that
That
we learn about, like attachment
yeah.
issues? And
Well, no, just health problems. The ones I was listing there, that those babies just are much more likely to have health problems that put them in the NICU
so
in
they're
the first
seeing
place.
that right away. Oh, IVF
Yeah, they
baby with
see
these
it
problems.
firsthand, and it's not even so it's right when they're born they're having these issues. And so in the nurses' minds, what they were trying to say is they're not going to use IVF because they know their baby is likely to suffer some kind of malformation or disease because of it. So I'm going to text my husband to come get. Uh,
Ladies and
so
gentlemen,
they're,
this is this is
they're
live
already just
recorded TV podcast, right? And my
okay.
guest,
Yeah.
Stacy Trasancos, she is actually the mother of 7 and the grandmother of how many?
Also 7 and counting.
Aw, yeah. So this is real life. Um, I'll let you finish
Yes.
that.
Okay, I'm good. I'm good. He's out in the shed.
So, being
So,
personal, what on earth caused you personally? I know you said initially that you're into the field of science, you're a chemist, but there's a lot of things you can do with chemistry. What caused you to have such a great interest in this topic?
well, for about 10 years now, from the scientific end, I've followed human embryonic stem cell research. Okay, so that is actually it's in the book. It's a related field because they get those human embryos for stem cell research from IVF, from the embryos that are left over in IVF. And so I had been following that already for about 10 years, more in that area, and then also fetal tissue research. So I've followed the research they do when they use the babies from abortion, killed by abortion, for their body parts. So that's my history with this issue. And then when Donald Trump became president, having promised that he was going to get into the issue of IVF and make it more affordable and available for the country, Sophia Institute Press asked me, can you write a book on this topic? And although I have 7 children and 7 grandchildren, people have asked me, how can you write with any authority on a topic like this? Well, because I'm old enough now, far enough down that path in life to know that whether it's infertility or something else, things are not going to go the way you plan in life ever. And what you have to do, that your strength as a person practicing virtue and the health of your marriage working through problems together, you have to be constantly conforming your will to God's will and asking God what that even means. You raise children and they have their own free will and they go different directions. It's constantly walking that tightrope of not overreacting and not underreacting and trying to discern what the best thing is to do, trying to discern what the best thing is to do in your marriage as it relates to each other. So, whether it's infertility or anything else, you can't just take matters in your own hands and try to control everything to get what you think you want, because you'll miss for a long time. I mean, God can make anything beautiful, but you'll miss for a long time what plans were in store for you. And B, you create new problems. We're always telling our kids, don't try to solve one problem by creating
Another.
more problems. Like, that's not what your goal is. I got interested in the issue for that because it's really a combination of my interest in the science and then also the philosophy of human dignity and what it means to be human, and the theology, of course, as a Catholic, with real life and a real situation in our country right now. I actually think the more we engage people about IVF, it opens the door to talk to people so much about marriage and two become one and the sanctity of marriage and the dignity of the human person. And it opens the door to so many things that we can talk about and evangelize about. So that's why I wrote the book.
Wow. Well, I congratulate you because that's like 5 months. It took me years to finish my book, and here you are zipping it
Yeah.
together in 5 months. So God bless you. You know, we talked about the parents and some of the other problems, but before I ask you about the more, I don't know, maybe philosophical things, have you also interviewed men and women, boys and girls who were born of IVF, and asked them what their thoughts were? Because I know I've talked to several, especially on this podcast, and I know, you know, one woman who wrote the book. I know my daddy's name is Donor, and she among many say, if you think you're doing me a favor by creating me without a father, think again. Even if you put this father in my life that's biological or that's non-biological, and even though he loves me, they always noticed a tension between uh, and it's different, right, for each person, but it's like that man again knows it's not biologically mine, and there's this kind of like cutting him off at the knees thing, like it was somebody else's. I couldn't do the job. But these kids themselves say, this one girl found out that she actually had, when she found out who her donor was, and she said to her dad, "Are you donor 50283?" And he's like, "Yes, I am." Found out she had 8 other siblings,
Wow.
and before she met them, they all had the same attachment issues. They all had the same struggles in terms of just not being able to connect, whether they were born into a two family home or a single mom or whatever. Anyway, so just hearing from them about, I just always yearned for something. And of course, I also know some of the science behind attachment and the hormones that are produced in that delivery and so on and so forth. Anyway, enough of me. Have you gotten any of their opinions, any of their thoughts, any of the research on the products of IVF, the humans?
I didn't get that far, honestly, because the book was getting long. The bulk of the book lays out the philosophical and theological argument, because I wanted it to be there in 10 premises. And then it's got the introduction about what all it is. And then the last part of the book gets into the embryo situation and some case studies. So the case studies part of the book was fairly small, but you're right. I think and I know there's a lot of work being done on this already with there's different websites and organizations that support people like you're talking about. I think that is the next big question, though. I love what you said about attachment, because I remember reading about that when I was raising my kids, and I'm a believer. I it you know, like I said, we're living the experiment right now. I don't know if we're going to understand for a long time all of the negative consequences associated with that. I mean, it's hard for me to imagine existing and not knowing where the genetic material came from. Like, I've always just lived. I mean, it's hard enough when parents get divorced.
Yeah.
And adoption even comes with its trauma. You know, the rights of that child were violated in a sense, even if we're trying to do the best thing. Adoption is something that needs to be addressed with the child. But to go so much
And
further to where,
intentionally violate the child by intentionally
yeah,
not having a
yeah.
father.
They don't even have how are they supposed to have an identity? You know, they're going to struggle with identity. And if you don't have an identity, how are you going to form healthy attachments? I mean, the world is full of people right now, just from failed relationships and marriage, even if the mother and father live under the same roof, they're still like divorced under the same roof because they don't talk about their problems, or whether the parents are actually divorced, or whether the single parents who never got married. That we already have so many people suffering from those brokennesses. This is just going to take it to another level. And I am concerned about it. You know, I don't mean to be dramatic, but you can just imagine Satan and all the demons being thrilled about this, because you break people, you break families, you break societies. It's going to be really hard for people to find their way in the world in the next couple of generations. And you know, who knows what we're leaving behind to our children and grandchildren. That, you know, that's kind of why I got the motivation to write the book. I got it out in a month, thanks to my husband helping with the granddaughter a lot. But it's because of that. Like, not on my watch am I just going to sit back and do nothing while I know this is happening. I read that there are between 1 and 4 million embryos in cryogenic storage right now in just the United States. And 1 in 4 million, that's a big range. The reason we don't know the exact number is because, as somebody put it, we keep better records for livestock than we do for human children. We don't even know how many are in storage, and that's horrifying.
Yeah, and how many just get thrown away, or how many are like, oh, well, you know, whatever. It's really funny. It's not funny. It shows the nature of our broken and our selfish humanity, where we will compare ourselves to the worst. Like what you were just saying, I've heard people say, well, I mean, your child's in a broken divorced home, so what's the point? I may as well have a child like this. And it's like, whoa, so you're saying you recognize that a child of divorce has hurt a child of adoption, even though, you know, is the next best scenario because a parent died or whatever. You're saying, well, because they suffer, it's okay if I create this child to suffer. And I look at our rationale, and we always tend to rationalize to make ourselves look good and forgive our own mistakes and not consider the other, in that.
Yeah.
It's just shows the nature of, well, selfish humanity, I should say, who we are.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah.
just a couple, you mentioned the embryos. So what kind of rights do human embryos possess? Do they have any? Are they even
Well,
considered
they have a
human?
right to life. Yeah, as humans, there, and this gets into some beautiful theology. We just celebrated the Holy Trinity Sunday. It's one of my favorite topics, because as a convert, I never heard that the human person is body and rational soul made in the image and likeness of God. I'd heard that last part before as a Baptist growing up, but I never really knew what it meant. You know, it's like, oh, God created us. That's wonderful. But it has a very precise meaning in Catholic teaching to be a human person, body, and rational soul. First of all, it means we're not just biological material. And second of all, because Christ revealed to us that God is one and three persons, one God and three persons, triune, and because, you know, we worked out from Scripture that what Christ told us, that you know, God the Father generates God the Son as an act of the intellect, kind of like we express our concepts as words externally. You have generation, conception, ideas, new life, and then God the Father and God the Son consubstantially spirate forth God the Holy Spirit as an act of love. So you have thinking and loving to get as processions in the Holy Trinity. And that means our rational souls made in the image and likeness of God, that's where we understand our powers of intellect and will, our power to think, and our power to seek truth, and our power to seek love. And we need to search for truth. We need to search for love. We need to love and be loved, to know and be known, and to belong. That is naturally in us, and everybody knows it. But the sense of it is in God's existence and then God's revelation, and we understand ourselves that way. And so when you get all of that, then you understand why that kind of brokenness hurts so much, because it's contrary to the way God made us. And it's a beautiful teaching. It's something I think a lot of people don't don't, a lot of Catholics even don't understand, but it's one of the most beautiful things in the world to understand who you are and what it means to say you're a child of God. Um, and when you understand that, then you quickly can understand why IVF is wrong.
Oh, so one last question on kind of that topic is how do we love these children who are sitting in
Yeah.
petri dishes who we don't even really look at as children? We just kind of look at it as a couple cells.
It's hard. And I think that's the first thing. I have a whole chapter in the book. It's a chapter I really wanted to write. It's something I thought about when I was doing the stem cell research, um, how to love an embryo. And we had 5 miscarriages, and and I had to think about it a lot then too. How do you love an embryo? So we don't we the way we take in data, like you hold a little baby, you see it, you touch its soft skin, you smell its hair, his or her hair, you hold that baby. We have in our imaginations, that's a biological process. We take in these sensory inputs, these data of the world. We take it in, and our brain actually processes it, and that informs our intellect then about what's good. That's why people want their own baby. They've had the experience of seeing babies and holding babies, and they have this vision of what it's going to be like to hold their own baby. But we don't have the same kind of thing with embryos. Nobody's really ever seen an embryo except for the scientists who look at them in the petri dishes. The embryo is meant to be hidden. It's in the mother's womb, and we don't have a sensory experiential base with cute little embryos to yearn for them in the same way that we do newborn babies. If you say to someone, we're going to kill newborn babies, they know instantly that's wrong. If you say we're going to put newborn babies in the freezer and suspend their life until somebody wants to raise them, everybody knows that's wrong. But when you do the same with embryos, we naturally don't have the same reaction. And so, if you're going to understand, if you're going to find your own love for these embryos, you have to let go of your sensory data, your memories, and your imagination. And you have to do the same thing we do when we're talking about God's existence. You have to use your critical, abstract thought processes and allow yourself to say, in my case, with the ones I miscarried, that was a little Trasancos. That was my child. I am the mother. I'm never going to hold this child. I'm never going to see this child grow up. But that little multi-celled blob, that embryo, was a human child on its trajectory of life. And that was my baby.
And that child
And,
still
and that was hard
exists.
for me because
Yeah.
when I lost a baby to miscarriage that was very early, the doctor said, "Don't worry about it. It was just a chemical pregnancy." And I said, "No, that wasn't a chemical pregnancy. That was my child." And the hard part about letting yourself love that child, the hard part for me about letting myself love these millions of embryonic children in cryogenic storage tanks, is that it's so heartbreaking then because you love them, and now you have to admit the great injustice, social injustice being done to them. Or with miscarriage, I had to let myself mourn the loss of a child. And that was hard. There's a risk in letting ourselves love these embryos, but I do think we have to start there. We have to be able to calm down the imagination and the emotions and just realize this is a very abstract love, but we have to then pour our heart out for these babies in our nation. It actually makes me angry that there's that many children frozen in tanks, and I feel helpless to do anything about it because they're not mine. But I don't want that in our society. I don't want a society that puts children in tanks until somebody wants to raise them or then donates them to science. I don't want to build that kind of society, you know?
What is your PhD in? I just realized you're a doctor.
Chemistry. So chemistry first, and then I became Catholic in my 30s, and then I got 2 more master's degrees in dogmatic theology and systematic philosophy. And I'm working on a second doctorate in
Oh my gosh.
philosophy now, just because it just became a journey for me. I really want to understand this stuff. It matters to me. And I'm older now. My kids are almost all grown and the grandkids are around and I'm comfortable working with the chaos around me and just kind of living my best life now, pursuing these studies because these are things I care very much about. And I'm at a point in my life when I can do that.
Excellent. So, name one thing you would have our listeners do differently as a result of something they heard today.
Um, I think it would be to let yourself love the embryos, to really get your head around what it means to love an embryo, that you were loved as an embryo, that God created you in your mother's womb before anybody else, including her, even knew you existed yet. There you were one day, and God has loved you ever since that moment. And that's the thing I would take away from this is really let yourself learn how to love all those unknown embryos, your own embryos, other people's embryos. Learn how to get your head around that human life begins that small. And then when you understand those embryos have rights, the right to be born of marital love between a husband and wife, it reorients how you think about human life in all other aspects. So that's really the hope is God created you, God loves you. There's so many blessings to be found, even when it seems hard. There's so many blessings to be found by following God's will for your life, the teachings of the church, and God's individual will for each of our own lives and whatever path we're all on, trying to figure out who we are.
Easily said or well said. And one thing that just came to mind while you were saying that is like, instead of looking at them as embryos, which is just a stage of life, that they are souls, that there are petri dishes full of souls. God breathed life into them the moment the egg and the sperm came together and that flash of light happened. So we have thousands and thousands of souls that are just yearning to be born, even if they don't know they're yearning to be born. And yeah, let's see what we can do about them. And let's see that we don't have them stored, that their only existence is ever in a petri dish and they never get the chance to be born. You will meet them in heaven one day because once a soul exists, it never goes away.
Yep.
So God can tell us how that's going to work out. But
Mm-hmm.
all of you watching, please get yourself educated on this subject and get this book. Again, it's called IVF is Not the Way, The False Promises of Artificial Procreation. Again, anything artificial is not of God. And my guest doctor, Stacy Trasancos, has really done a comprehensive job, I think, in integrating the philosophical, the theological, but then also the physical, the chemical, the emotional aspects of this very tender subject. For those of you, like my family member, who have chosen this option, this is a non-judgment zone, and we don't have to judge you, the reasons you did what you did. I'm sure your reasons were pure in most cases, but just consider the other. Consider the information before you make that decision in the future. So anyway, Stacy, I really, really appreciate you. I appreciate this subject. I hope you do write a follow-on book that gets more case studies in it, gets the perspectives of the
Yeah.
children. Because as they told you when you're writing this book, those are the things that sell. It's not just a scientific or a theological, or the thing I always hear from
Yeah.
people, God understands. Yeah, he
Yes.
does, but he understands that you chose to go against his order and create your own order.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Yeah.
again, non-judgment there. So how can people find you? I know you have a Substack.
Yeah, my Substack is called God and Elements, and I like to say if you even come close to spelling my last name correctly, you'll find me online. It's Stacy Trasancos, Trasancos, but if you Google that or Bing it or however you search, you'll find me. But my Substack is where I'm putting all the stuff I'm working on now, especially in the area of science, philosophy, and theology. The natural theology and the philosophy of nature. So you can find me there. And then I have several other books that I've published on various issues at the intersection of faith and science.
And there will be links right here in the show notes. Just click below and you can get to the
Yep.
Substack. You can get to that website. But get your book if you can, because even though all these books are usually on Amazon, and I know this one as well, if you could go through Sophia Institute, it might
Yes.
be, a couple extra dollars for shipping, but it's always better to help the publishers and the writers rather than, farming it out and getting even extra money for Amazon and those places. So I'll have a link to sophiainstitute.com right here in the show notes as well. Please get this book and please give it to those people who are still in childbearing age so they can understand. Who knows? Even if you save one life, if you spare one child from the troubles, one woman who may end up being infertile because of this, who knows? But we don't want our children and ourselves to become science experiments. Let's put our trust in God. We know He knows what's best, even if we struggle with infertility, even if we don't know why He didn't allow you to have a child the quote unquote right way. God knows why, and He has your best intentions always at heart. And we pray for you. We pray for all of you that have these struggles with infertility, or for some reason need a child or desire a child, I should say. Our prayers are with you, and we stand with you. And just keep your eyes fixed on God and ask Him to be the decision maker in your case. So I would like it if you liked, subscribed, shared this show with your friends, your family. This is a very what's the word I'm looking for? Current topic. This is something that is important to today. And as Stacy said before when we first went on the air, when I heard President Trump say that on January 20th, I was like, don't do that. You don't understand. So let's get some of this research into people's hands so they can make better informed decisions. You can find me at breakfastwithbacon.com, all the social media places. I just recently opened up a TikTok, which I know the Chinese are going to get all my information, but whatever. U.S. government has all my information too. They're all selling it.
Anyway.
That was my rationale. I'm like, whatever, everybody knows everything.
Yeah.
Off the subject, just got back from Uganda, was coming back through customs, was ready to hand them my passport. They just say, stand in front of the camera. They go, oh, you're Christine Bacon. I was like, yeah. And I'm like, that's scary. Didn't even need my passport. And I was like, so I opened up TikTok. I got Instagram. I also have Facebook.
Yay.
I also have Rumble.
Yeah.
All the places. Go ahead and like and share. It really does help. And I'd be honored if you'd help my ministry by taking these messages and these great guests that God gives me and sharing them with the world. So I think that's it. Now we're going to test our Dr. Trasancos and see how much she remembers the stuff that I told her. Okay, so I got to find it here. All right. I am Dr. Christine Bacon. You've been watching Breakfast with Bacon, and I'd like to remind you always to live your life. Remember what you have to say?
Oh,
sunny side up.
Sunny side up. Yes, I remember. I was trying to get my mic fixed when you said that. Yes, sunny side up.
Sunny side up.